I'm Dave Moss. I run the unfunded list. I've been doing that for, oh, thanks. Margaret actually runs the unfunded list. There's a lot of people that, when you run a nonprofit, every time you start thanking people, you run the risk of missing somebody. But the person that I absolutely can't miss is Margaret. We're going to do a little bit of and also my mother helped me out. If you're going to start a nonprofit, I think you should have a retired and qualified mother before you do that. That's been invaluable as well. But a lot of you have helped out as well. A lot of you are evaluators, have sent proposals to us, have given me advice. Things I want to thank as many, in a general sense, thank you all. In particular, I think we're all quite honored to hear from our panelists today. Like me, most of these folks have founded something. And are pretty uniquely familiar with the challenges that are involved with that. And Russ here, who has some founder experience himself, is also plays some sort of advisory role to all of our panelists. So our moderator, Russ, is familiar with them and some of the specific challenges that they've gone through. So I'm hoping that we have a nice, intimate panel today. The motto for Unfunded List in Latin is exaudio, compario, conloquor, which means listen, learn, speak. And I like to say that no matter what we're doing, I want to make sure that everybody listens, learns, and speaks. So that's our panelists are going to do some listening, they're going to learn, and they're going to obviously speak. And in the audience as well, right? You're going to listen, you're going to learn. I want you to also feel free to ask questions near the end. Come up to our panelists afterwards. Make sure that over the course of the weekend, you all practice exaudio, compario, conloquor, right? I also want to give a shout out to our runner-up Latin motto, which was Scientia est potestas. Knowledge is power. Right? So try to keep those things in mind as you go through today. The more you know. See, how do you know how to pronounce it? Their language, Mom. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to remind everybody that we review proposals twice a year. Our next deadline is March 1st. If you have a fundraising proposal of any kind, I'd be happy to get some experts. Some of them might be in this room, some of them might be in another room somewhere. But I'll get the most appropriate experts I can to read your proposal, give you the most helpful advice we possibly can. We've been doing that every 6 months for the last few years. We get better and better at it each time. So if you've got a proposal, send it in. If not, then join us and review some of the proposals. We'd love to have you as reviewers as well. Again, that deadline is coming up March 1st. And with that, I'm going to let Russ get started here. I know your name, but Ross is sitting there, and I'm just so nervous about it. But I got it right.
One of my happiest moments was when Ross and I met up with my friend Rusty, and that somehow felt so pleasing to have a trio like that together. Hi, my name is Russ Finkelstein, and I'm what's known as a very, very reluctant facilitator or speaker, period. So my goal is to hopefully just move this along and allow these amazing people to share a little bit more of their story. I was one of the founders of this thing called Idealist.org, and as a result of that, I just enjoyed meeting with folks who were themselves founders and were going through things and trying to chat with them about some of the things that they face. And I have the sort of like great fortune to work in a variety of spaces where I get to work with founders and chat with them about their struggles and their issues and their successes, and to try to help them both with creating structures to be more successful, as well as to kind of offer up kind of emotional support whenever possible. So when I was chatting with Dave, I said, this is, if I were to do something, especially this concept of founders and people who are funding them, if that's what this event has a sort of like a focus around that, I'd like to have a real conversation about the challenges that I've learned that some of them face when they're doing that work. So yeah, welcome. Thank you all for attending. And I think the way we're going to begin this is by having you all share a little bit about what your work is and why it matters. So do you want to start, Ross?
Sure. I'm Ross Morales-Ricchetto. I co-founded an organization called Run for Something. We recruit and support young, diverse, progressive folks who are running for state and local office for the first or second time. Our work matters in large part because there's no pipeline on the left or in progressive spaces, or there hasn't been in the past, for people who basically weren't white dude lawyers to run for office. And so a huge part of the work that we do is changing what it looks like to be an elected official, to make it so that something that, you know, somebody in Columbus, Ohio, like, can see themselves in, and also bring sort of like honor back to the profession of like being an elected official. At the end of the day, it's a form of public service, and I think a huge part of the reason why I do this work is because I think we really need to see it that way again, and that's not how a majority of people in the United States see it. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Elle Hearns. I am the executive director and founder of the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which is a human rights organization that protects and defends Black transgender people here in the United States. That is the work that I have chosen. I say I've chosen it because it is certainly work that tests your faith. I chose that work because there was really I think, opportunity and open space to do more around this particular community that had really been shut out of societal spaces, but also what we consider societal norms. And so our work has really emerged at a time where the murders of Black transgender women in the United States are mostly what people understand today. And we wanted to be able to create a space that exalts it, that there's more to our humanity, and there's also a lot to fight for.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I run an organization called Transformation. I also have a stutter, which you'll find. So Transformation is an app that helps people hosting events redistribute the food that they don't use. So from places like this, like you have a whole spread, where's it going to go after this? There's really no options that you have unless you want to spend hours on the phone trying to call shelters or soup kitchens or trying to put it in an Uber and take it there yourself, and they're not going to take it because I tried. So we started it because I spent a lot of time working in the event space, and I thought it was really dumb that it didn't already exist. Like, why is it that everything you can do at the touch of a button, like I can order food, I can like call a ride, I can hire a dog walker, but when it comes to like me having all the success and wanting to take it somewhere, all of a sudden I hit every single roadblock. Like, is it the right type of food? Will someone get sick? How do I pack it? How do I get it there? And these are questions that everyone that works in any, like, you can work in hospitality, restaurants, you can be hosting this event and have the same questions. So we decided to build an app that kind of worked like Uber but for food pickups. So it's instant. You can schedule a pickup on demand for any food that you haven't touched. It's connected to Uber Eats, DoorDash, like people who are already driving around doing this kind of work, because I don't think any work should be free and volunteers are not going to solve the issue. So it connects you to a driver that's already doing this as like for a living. They'll pick it up and they're automatically routed to a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen where the people can eat it that same day. So now they get like steaks and tiramisu, which I think is great because I don't eat like that either. Never taken the food, but yeah, I did once. But and I think it was just a matter of it wasn't, I haven't been food insecure. It was just a space that I thought needed this, and it didn't exist, and so it wasn't so much of a personal pull as this is a really stupid problem, and I can't believe that there isn't anything out there yet.
Hi everyone, I'm Idealist, or Idealist in Espanol. I'm the founder and CEO of Radical Health. What we do at Radical Health is we really look at health equity, right? The idea that everyone should have access to equitable care, especially those in marginalized or historically marginalized communities. And we address that through meaningful conversation. Our conversations happen in person, so we use indigenous circles to talk, right? What does health mean? If I ask you all that, y'all would have different questions, or different answers rather. And we really get to go into community and have spaces and talk about that. And then we built out an app that is a Know Your Rights for Health app, which helps pregnant people of color ask questions before we go in for an appointment and beyond. So I always talk about when we look at health especially, we probably spent more time picking out one of those lunch boxes or coffee or tea than we do thinking about our appointments, right? And what questions we should ask. And today in the US, Black women die on average 3 to 4 times more likely during pregnancy compared to their white counterparts. And a lot of that is, structural bias and racism, but more importantly, it's the power and the agency, right, to hold a healthcare system that doesn't serve any of us well accountable and really help foster those more meaningful conversations. I started this because I'm from the Bronx, I'm born and raised there, I still live there, and even though I had a really successful career in healthcare, I trained physicians on new drugs that would come out. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I realized it didn't matter how much money I made, didn't matter how smart I was, or how many great people I knew and all my connections. We were still in a hospital and in a system that treated us unfairly because of our skin color and because of our socioeconomic status. And so for me, it was really just troubling to see that, you could have all the resources and not be able to navigate the system, and also not be able to be heard and be seen. So I kind of wanted to change that, and want to change it with people who don't necessarily have the pedigree or all the letters after a name, just knowing that what you've lived through and what you're living through is important and needs to be centered and valued. And together through that organizing and coming together of conversations and self-agency is how we change healthcare.
So it's easy to see across the responses that all of you were reacting to voids, right? You all noticed a void. I'm curious, going off of actual questions I told you I would ask. Can you talk a little bit about what you did in the way of landscape analysis? I'm just thinking about folks from this room who are thinking about maybe starting something. So how did you go about making sure you thought there was a void? How did you go about making sure that in fact there was a void? What was that process like of you educating yourself about what the landscape was before you decided to say I'm gonna go and create a thing that's gonna try to impact this problem? And we could do that in any order you decide.
I'm happy to start. So I worked in healthcare as my day job, and then because I needed to do something more fulfilling, I was a community organizer. And so for me, I just literally pulled everyone I knew to my dining room table, and I said, "Come over, I will give you wine and free snacks. Let's just talk." And started asking questions about I had a teacher, a doctor, my aunt, my cousin, and I mean, pretty much if I saw any of you, I'd be like, "Come over, don't worry, it's not weird at all." And just started asking questions about when you have a problem, right? Do you feel like you trust your doctor? And what are the things, if you had a magic wand, what do you want? And it was through that process that I just started organizing and grew out of my kitchen table pretty fast, and then started going to everyone I knew who worked at a nonprofit. And I was like, "Can I just chat with you? Can I chat with, I went to a music program where they taught kids cello," and I'm asking them questions about health, right? And it turned out that the music teacher was like, "Yeah, all these kids and parents keep coming to us. We're I'm a cello teacher. I don't know what to do." And so just started expanding and really organizing, using community organizing principles to ask questions.
Yeah, so I love the kitchen table. I think the kitchen table for so many of us, especially Black people, Indigenous folks, people of color, is such a place of symbolism, but also just of importance. So, what I'm doing now, I didn't know people did that for a living. So I love this community organizing principles and started using that. I didn't know that that's what I was doing for the longest time. I had no idea that there was this thing, I didn't know the nonprofit industrial complex. I had no knowledge of what that was coming from where I come from in Columbus, Ohio. There really aren't a lot of nonprofits, and certainly not profitable ones. So I kind of came into this work on accident. I wanted to create community space for other women like me, and there wasn't any space like that existed. And so at the very beginning of my professional journey, it was really just organic and unpaid and completely unthought of. I just wanted to create space for other Black trans women. I was creating that space while the murders of Black people were happening by the police. And so that work kind of merged together and kind of formed this larger narrative around all Black Lives Matter. I think during my time with Black Lives Matter, I got exposed to the world in a way that I never had been. So I understood what was happening in, cultural movements, but also what was happening in Black movement. And one of the things that I was clear, there was no designated space that was specifically for Black transgender people. And so what was constantly happening to me is I would show up in a room, very much like this, coalition meetings or whatever the case may be, and I was the only one from my community. And so I was just like, I'm sick of this. Y'all keep inviting me, and I'm here by myself. It's 50 of you, and it's just me. And what started happening is there were people who became very resistant to that, who I was working with. And I said, okay, y'all tired of hearing my mouth. I actually am just going to quit, and I'm going to do my own thing. But doing my own thing was something, again, I had no knowledge of. So, I think it's just important to share some of those stories. Sometimes you have no idea what the hell you're doing and you want to give up. But I think one of the things that I've always tried to maintain is that I'm still connected to whatever the experience I was having that led me to a kitchen table. I was fresh out of jail. So that was kind of why I was like, I was lonely in jail, but I was also lonely in the world. How can I create some community with people who might have that experience in their future? How can I interrupt that from happening to them? So I always just try to stay connected to what was my reason at the very beginning, as opposed to all of the things that will become your reasons once you create something. Because most people will tell you that their number one reason, well, maybe most people won't say this actually, but I'm going to tell you the truth. It's money. Most people stay in it for money, but it's really important to make sure that your foundation is there so that money isn't the root of what keeps you encouraged.
I love what you said. I think when I think of the void that we initially set out to fill, it was so different from what it actually became. Like when we started, I was like, oh, we're in the food space, we're solving for hunger. But I think very quickly working in this space, I realized, one, I cannot speak for the hungry population because I've never been there, and I shouldn't feel like I have the right or the experience to be a spokesperson for that. And two, it's just that, I don't know, one, just because you're giving a hungry person a sandwich doesn't mean that you're solving hunger. Hunger exists because people can't afford to buy food, not because they don't have access. So that, but also I realized as I was going on and sort of trying to navigate the space that there's a lot of other things that can be solved for when you're solving for one thing. I think for us in working in the food space, a lot of it was just, we don't use people in the way that, in a fair way, to actually solve issues. We rely really heavily on unpaid labor. We think it's okay to pay people minimum wage to do a job that maybe is impacting one population in a very positive way, but then is keeping people at the minimum wage or expecting them to work for free. And so I think as we continue to move into this space, I realized that we're not working in the hunger space, we're working in the environment space, but in my mind, I think the most important thing that we're doing is that we're actually creating more economic opportunity for a population that works in the nonprofit space that is very much overlooked, because the service providers aren't really seen as the population that should be benefiting while doing good. And to do good a lot of the time means to work for a very low wage or work for free. And so I think we started out as a hunger organization, but realized very quickly that is not, you could be working in a space and people can tell you your environment, your hunger, you're this, you're that, but it doesn't, there's so much, all these problems are interconnected, I feel. And so when you start with one, you're gonna realize oh, it's connected to this and it's connected to this and 100 other things. And I think the important thing is to find something that you feel comfortable representing. And making sure that if you're working in a space that you don't represent properly, that you find the people who are and bring them in. I think to be completely honest, we were short-staffed, and I didn't have the time to do as much community outreach as I would have liked. And so instead of our lens being hunger, I put my full focus on finding couriers, delivery people, drivers, made them very much the face of what we do. And if you ask me, I don't work in the hunger space, I work in the economic empowerment space, because those drivers are the reason why I'm doing this in the first place. It's not, I do not think what we're doing solves hunger at all, but I do think that it provides some kind of economic opportunity that wasn't there before. And so just navigating spaces, I think you realize that like you're dipping your toes into a lot of bins or pools, and then you pick the pool that you feel like you can most accurately represent, and you sort of go with that.
So as you all think about this, so kind of moving over from this notion of filling a void, I think there's also an idea of, so who am I to be the person to do this? So can you speak a little bit to what it was? Was there a moment or what it took for you to have the confidence that you were the right person to be doing this work? Any more?
So for me, you know, I have a lot of different experiences that kind of led to me being like, I choose me, but I didn't always start out that way. I think because the territory was so open and I felt so uncomfortable, I was really okay being in the backseat and being just quiet. So probably my first year of organizing, I was quiet. I think, and I talk a lot about the beginning of my career because it informed so much of what's happening now. So I try to proactively plan based on what it is that I've learned, as opposed to just responding, because there's a lot of reactionary things that happen when you're building something new. And I like to be on the proactive end, but I think there was just this piece of, not only was I doubting me, there were other people that were doubting me. And so I think there was a particular interview that I did. And I did not want to do the interview, but I did it anyway. And I think that was the lesson for me in when my gut says no, listen. You know, and I still question all of the reasons why someone who I thought was a mentor encouraged me to do it, but nonetheless, I'm sure you're going to talk about that. Choose your mentors wisely. My God. But I did this interview and I literally had 30 minutes of prep for the interview. So I got the talking points, like literally 5 minutes while I was in the makeup chair to do the interview. And so it was the worst interview of my life. I was nervous. I was just unprepared. And I think probably weeks later, I was like, I thought I had all of this support, but I really didn't, because I felt so unsupported. And I think that was the moment for me, was if I felt so unsupported in this space with what I thought were mentors and people to help me, then certainly I could feel unsupported by myself. And so that started the trajectory of me thinking about what was missing from my work and what was missing from, I think, just my personhood. And it was the ability to make decisions for myself without any influence. And that really shifted, I think, my own kind of pathway into saying, okay, it's me. And I think one of the challenges, even in creating an organization that I can talk about now, one of the things I'm currently experiencing, and I don't mind being honest with you all, I hope you all don't mind. When you create something that is connected to your life and you create an organizational space, so just a little bit more about MPJI, we are attempting to be a membership organization. So what that means is that we have many people who have shared identity and have shared experience that make up our organization. So there are very different views and ideas about what we should be doing. Figuring out a collective process and decision making has been one that is challenging, because at the end of the day, there are structural hierarchies and power that you have to think about, but there's also experiences. And so, you know, for me, I try to create an open space while also remembering that it is my identity, it is my experiences that also contribute to the organization. So yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for you all about how that's going. I think we're currently in process, but it is one of the most challenging things is to make sure that you aren't choosing yourself simply because you created a thing. And so one of the things that I really try to do is I try to make sure we're honoring other voices, we're honoring other experiences. So, you know, for instance, we're doing a Black History Month series, a digital series currently. I made sure that, you know, my team knew we would not honor anybody from our staff or our board, just because it was important to make sure that there were new faces, new voices, new experiences, and new stories that the world had access to, but also to be able to just achieve, I think honoring other people besides yourself is one of the greatest ways to structure an organization. So that's what we try to do at MPJI.
I'm happy to answer. I think for me it was I worked in corporate. I like hustled the whole way, worked long hours, and every time I worked for startups and pharmaceutical companies, I was often the only woman in the room and definitely the only person of color. And what would happen, and to be honest, like I identify as Afro-Latina, right? So by far the only Afro-Latina in the room. And what was happening was I was working for CEOs who like, you know, made me work hard, made me feel guilty about going home for families. But yet I was delivering and like, you know, selling, bringing in contracts, bringing in clients, making sure everyone was happy. And in that whole process, it was one that like I didn't see my community represented. I didn't see anyone that looked like me. My community, like in communities like mine and other historically marginalized communities were never represented in those boardrooms. And for a long time, I doubted myself. I was like, oh, not me, never me. Why? Like, I'm so unqualified. But then it just got to the point where I was like, if I could do it for you, I can absolutely do it for my community. And I think I still struggle times where like, you know, I don't have an MPH, I don't have any of the public health or health degrees. But what we're trying to do at Radical Health is we're literally transforming this healthcare system from this paternalistic top-down approach to one where like the people lead. So if not me, then who? And then I'd also say like, you know, all of you, right, are the ones that should be leading. And then, I mean, to be fair, like there have been incredible Black and brown women that have led the way for me to even imagine that this is possible. So it's still you know, like just kind of start somewhere.
Yeah, great. Do you wanna-
I'm a cis white dude, and so in theory, like I should just like feel like this is like, yeah, like of course I should run an organization. That's what one would expect. But like truthfully, like if I'm being honest, like I still question on a regular basis whether I think I'm the right person, like to do this work. Probably, I think that at least once every day. And you know, some of it is because to a large degree, like the work we do is with like young folks who are people of color from like traditionally marginalized backgrounds, and I'm none of those things. I'm like youngish, like 35. But like, you know, we're trying to get like folks like into the process who like would have never been a part of the process before, and honestly who the process wasn't designed for. So I think that's part of it. I think some of it is also that like, you know, I sort of like come to this work like as sort of like I'm like my background is in politics. Like I'm like a political operative. Like you could call me a political hack, and I would like take that as a compliment. Like I chose politics as my chosen profession. I love it. I tried other things. I hated those other things. So I went back into politics again. So, you know, like I think that to like a large degree, like there are probably also people in the space that would probably be better at this work than I am. I also think that like, you know, a lot of this, like for Run for Something, what we did and the way we started, our success, like honestly, in part started by accident. My co-founder and I like literally like thought about this idea, we were like, well, like, let's give it a try. We thought it was going to be a side hustle. We thought if we were really lucky, maybe 100 people would be interested in the first year. We launched a website on Inauguration Day in 2017, and like over 1,000 people signed up basically immediately. And now 46,000 people have told us that they're interested in running for office, like all around the country. And so, you know, some of it, I think to a degree, and part of the reason why we're doing it right now is in part because like there was a moment and we got all of those people coming in and we literally said to ourselves like, holy shit, like this is not what we were planning to do, and we have to do right by all of these people. So that we literally set out to build an organization that was completely different than what we had originally designed and thought about. That was like for the folks that were coming in the door and telling us that they were interested. And I think a big part of what both my co-founder and I think a lot about is what happens to the org after us. I don't think either one of us have any intention of staying for the, you know, for like 10, 15, 20 years. I personally believe, like, especially in youth organizing work, like, if you can't relate to the folks that you're working with, then like you shouldn't be the one running the organization. And so I will eventually age out of the work that we do. And, you know, for us, we want to build an organization that is stable and can exist for the long term. And also, like, you know, we also want to build a leadership pipeline in our organization that makes it so that the folks who work at the organization and the folks who will eventually own whatever it becomes after us are the people who are from the communities that we're looking to work with. So, yeah.
Well, it should come as a surprise to no one at this event that fundraising can be a problem. So in the course of your work, if you were to offer up, you know, a tip, a specific thing that you feel like you've learned along the way to folks who are attending, what would that be?
I would like to jump in here.
Do it.
I have so many thoughts on fundraising. We tried the traditional fundraising route. We are nonprofit. It does not work for me. As many times as people have told me that it doesn't play out on an unequal power dynamic, that is a lie. And like, I just don't think that 80% of my time should be spent trying to convince people that the idea works when it's working. And I also don't believe that I should have to use statistics that like bring a tear to the eye just because we're nonprofit. But unfortunately, we are a nonprofit. And so till we switch our status, what I think should be something that you think about before you start anything, for profit or nonprofit, are what are your revenue streams? And like, where can you have revenue coming in? Like, is there a way that you can sort of structure your organization to make it so that someone is paying for something? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that like you should have people who cannot afford to pay for what you're offering pay for it, but there is always a party that can pay for something, and you have to identify that. Because I think it took us like 2 years longer to actually get started because we were so bent on trying the traditional fundraising route. And it's really not for everyone, especially when you're first starting, because you end up spending so much time just trying to build relationships. And if you don't have a fundraising person, you're going to spend a lot of time doing that and not enough on actually building what you're building. And for us, we're at 100% logistics and operations. So there's pickups going on every minute of every day. And in the beginning, if I wasn't supervising that, then who is? Like, if our service is complete shit and I'm too busy trying to fundraise to keep it afloat, like, it just doesn't make sense in my mind. And so we haven't had a donation dollar come in like the last 5 years, but what we did start doing is convincing corporations who are scheduling these pickups to pay a fee. So instead of paying a hauling fee for trash, you would pay a donation fee. You would get a tax write-off for the donated food, which is valued very high, because catered food is valued very high. And you get to positively brand yourself as like, look, Goldman Sachs is, oops, I signed an NDA. X company is now
Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs is now like a champion for environmental justice and food safety in their community. Like, so they are paying to donate free food, which was the biggest pushback that we got. But they're also getting a lot of other things for the payment that they're making. And you'd be surprised if you push a little bit what people are willing to pay for. And so if the traditional fundraising route is not for you, because it was not for me, then try and, before you start, figure out like who can pay for it and how you can have at least one revenue stream coming in, so that even if you lose all your funders, you have a little bit that can keep you afloat.
I would offer that I had a mentor here in DC. Actually, she told me, she told me two things. She said, "You're going very far, and don't go very far without any money." And I was like, "Well, girl, I don't got no money now. What you mean?" But I'm always grateful that she taught me that. I think we have very different ideological beliefs, but her belief that trans women should have money was something that really stuck with me. And so, you know, as I approached building out an organization, you know, I did a lot of research. So, you know, to kind of go back, I did a lot of research about what was in the field, but also what will we need to be as we enter into the field, which, you know, is jargon and language that's used in nonprofit. But one of the things that I was clear about is I wanted as much freedom as I could have as it related to money. So there's, you know, typically like operational, general funds, and then there's program specific. And so I made sure that our fundraising strategy was to go for as much general operating money as possible, because one of the things that doesn't exist in nonprofits is there is not a lot of resources that go into supporting people of color, specifically Black organizations, sustain. And so there is a lack of funding around infrastructure for those organizations. So typically those organizations absorb and obtain a lot of money responding to things, but not necessarily preparing or planning for the long term. And so the NAACP model, while it is a model, it is one of one. There's not many organizations that you can compare it to. The Marsha P. Johnson Institute, there are not many organizations that work for Black trans people that are working on economic justice issues or that are working on reproductive justice issues for Black trans people. So for me, it was really important that not only we had general operating funds, but that we also had money to hire people, not only because of the economic statement that we were making when numbers and statistics like $10,000 a year is the average salary for Black transgender people in America. So we weren't just trying to upend that, we were really just trying to upend that we have solutions. And in order for us to be able to provide the solutions to these statistics that funders and foundations love, we need to be able to hire people. And so that's kind of where we are in process. We're still building our infrastructure. We launched last year, so we're still a new organization, which I'm enjoying the new, but I think just one of the long-term strategies also for me is that a 5-year plan. As soon as you create something, I hope within your creation you have a 5-year plan for your beginning, your middle, and then your end, because you've got to move. I think organizations stay stagnant when people are there for 10, 15 years, especially white people. There's no reason a white person should be in an organization for 10 to 15 years when you have essentially made, you know, most high top tier orgs. People are making like, you know, $250,000 a year. So as we think about the economic gap in this country, I think is really important for any person who is white, who is creating something, to think about that, move out of the way. And even for myself, I'm 32. I think I'm 32. Yeah, I'm 32. My 5-year plan, I created this organization when I was 30. By the time I'm 35, I should have learned enough that I need to be moving on to something else. But I think I say all of this because that also is a part of the infrastructure fundraising that you certainly want to be considering is, am I putting this organization in a financial sound place so that in 5 years I can move on. One of the things about revenue streams, I think that's also really, really important for us, because we are somewhat, actually no, we're a political organization who has political beliefs that are not necessarily mainstream or affiliated with any particular party, it is very difficult to obtain resources to do political work. And so that's one of the things where, you know, for us as an organization that is anti-capitalist, we also struggle around what other revenue streams do we choose. So we try to do our best to create relationships with partners that have shared beliefs, as opposed to just taking money from any organization or company that throws it at us. So, you know, I think the values of your company, the values of your organization are certainly what you have to consider in your fundraising strategy also.
I think I'm going to echo y'all. I think hit it on the head when we talk about revenue streams, right? And the succession plan or the exit plan. For me, I founded Radical Health, and we are a benefit corp. So we didn't go the nonprofit route, and a lot of that was I wanted to do good work, but I also wanted to create generational wealth for my family, for my community, for other folks, and be intentional about that. And I think that, like, you know, they've already said, I think, everything that needs to be said. But the one thing that I'll say is, like, sometimes we start organizations and we want to give back, and we're all about how can we give back. What I would challenge you to think about is how can you give up, right? And giving up of power. And so whether that is, right, what we do is we give up education so that folks are empowered and they can kind of take this on. And if I'm successful, Radical Health does not need to exist. But I'd say the same thing in terms of leadership, in terms of, you know, doing good. Hannah, you talk about, right, like giving up actual dollars that could be in your pocket, but to your drivers, right? And how do we start to give up to make a difference and really look at power and those structures in our work?
I'll just say one thing. We only raise political money, so we don't get any money from foundations or like traditional like nonprofit entities. The only thing I'll say on fundraising is if you don't want to fundraise, then don't be a founder. Like, truthfully, like, it's hard and it sucks, and honestly it's demeaning and oftentimes demoralizing. There's a lot of terrible things that are associated with fundraising, especially the kind of fundraising, like, we basically are just rely on like rich people and like grassroots donations. Like, those are our two revenue streams. And so the power imbalance there is real, and you will have to do things that you don't want to do, and it will not feel good. So if you don't want to do it, then go be like a managing director or like someone that you like really believe in. You should all start your own things, and like fundraising is a part of the job, and it's terrible.
As I think about the terms demeaning and demoralizing, I want to go back to the point of this panel is not to go and say you shouldn't start up a thing. It's just about having realistic expectations. Like the whole focus of it is like, what does it really mean to do a thing? Some of you are probably experiencing some of these things already. So to go into the next thing that might be slightly demeaning and demoralizing, one of the other things that I know that I've spoken with all of you about has to do with staffing, has to do with finding talent, and a particular challenge of finding talent. Very often it could be paid staff, and the challenge of paid staff and of finding people who believe in the mission, who are driven the same way that you are. And also, I would extend it as well to advisors. So can you share a little bit about what you've learned or experienced when it comes to bringing on paid staff members or advisors that would be fruitful for other folks to know?
It's hard. I'll just say, like, I have this whole thing, and we want to pay people equitably. I want to pay people well. I don't have a very big budget to pay, right, the $125,000 that I think everyone deserves annually. So then we find, we have folks who can afford to work for free or for very little, but are so far removed, right, from the work that we're doing and understanding the cause, right? Because there's a level of privilege. Like, if you don't need a salary, then great, but like, then you're not understanding. Then I have folks, right, who I want to hire, who are from the community, who I think would kill it and have the passion and get it the way I do, but like they have a whole family to feed and, you know, other families and whatnot. And so it is the hardest thing to do. Then we hire folks, you know, and it's a combination, and, you know, getting folks to come on and not. And so I don't know. I don't have a solution aside from, I don't really have a solution. Aside from, though, I will say on the advisor piece, and Russ has been great at this, is having folks who can advise, making sure that they understand, you know, you're as vulnerable as you can be and you choose to be with like the realities, the challenges, and even some of like, you know, my blind spots, but also my concerns. I'm always having this concern about like, you know, the white man on my team, like, do we bring him on? Can this be all, you know, POC led, you know, black, and then it is just always a challenge. And if y'all have advice, I'll take it.
Yeah. We've gone through a lot of people, just because we're in that phase where I can pay a very high hourly rate, but I can't pay for a full-time person. And so it's difficult to find a person who can take out the number of hours that I need them to take out during the week while balancing their other part-time job. Mm-hmm. And so until I can pay full-time, I realistically am not going to get the kind of candidate that I need. Mm-hmm. And so it's just difficult finding, like, and then you hire someone and turns out like they're not the person that you thought, or like they don't work in the way that you thought they would work, and it's just an absolute shit show. But like so I have made much use of using 1099s, like a lot of contractors, because you have to date the person before you marry them. Like you can't just have a full-time person come on if you don't know if you're going to work well together. And so I made the mistake of marrying many people before dating. So now I've realized that, you know, it's okay if we work with 1099s. They put in a lot of hours. We get the job done. We're a very lean team. We're all remote and we work. We're in 3 states now, so it's fine. Like we're working. So it might not look like the traditional team that I thought, but like I think we'll get there eventually. But for now, like I feel like it's like just, you don't have to have a huge team. Like even if it's just 2 people and you're working well, then you're working well. Like I think there's a lot of pressure to feel like I need to have a team, and like people like have like I need a media person. But like, do I really need a full-time social media person? Like probably not. Like we don't do that much marketing and we're doing fine. So I think like you kind of work with what you what you have and the budget that you have until you reach a point where maybe your budget's bigger, than date and then get married.
I love this question actually, because it is a shit show, and you know, I hate it also. I think one of the things that I've learned
You don't hate it. You haven't met the right person. It's a process.
No. I hate the process. I hate dating. No, let me I hate dating.
Yeah.
I love the process, but I also hate it's a love-hate relationship.
There's
and
love in there.
there is lots of love, but there's a lot of hate. Oh God! I mean, there's so many places to start. I think you both like encapsulate it a lot. I think I have so many thoughts around this just because it's probably like one of the main parts of your job as a founder is finding the right team. Oh God, I've tried a lot of different things, you know. So one of the things that I think is really important generally in life, but also in your work, is you have to be committed to failing more than you are winning. And, you know, as someone who likes to win, you know, like even at the spades table, I'll stab you. It's the reason I win. Losing is so hard for me. I take it so personal, and it makes me so sad. But, you know, I tried many things with creating my organization, and I'm still trying many things. And I think I'm at the end of kind of like the year 2 learnings. I set out to create an all Black trans board because I had never seen that before. I had never seen an organization have like an all transgender group of people, but Black people. And so I thought that was a good idea. Not that I still don't think it's a good idea. There were just things that I knew would come up. I just didn't know they would come up. And so I'll just start there. It's just, you have to have a lot of patience with a community of people who have been disenfranchised from so much. Because you're not going to get the outcomes that you desire immediately. And I think I'm in the place of, am I not getting the results that I desired, or is this just not working? You know, how much longer do I stay patient versus I want to win when I want to win? So that's one part of just like a structural challenge that exists. Staffing, you know, God is good. You know, so consultants are great. It gives you an opportunity to have a tryout. You know, it's like speed dating. It's like, we give you a 30-day contract, we'll give you a 90-day contract. I tried that as an experiment to see what results would I get. And so I hired 2 people from my community who I knew very well.
Or you thought you did.
Or I thought I did.
Yeah.
And it was the worst. I don't want to say worst, because I loved it. It taught me a lot. I learned to love what I learned. But going through it was really hard because I was like, you know, I had one staff person who was trying to take me through what they thought was leadership development, but that's not what they were hired to do for me. And so it was like, who are you in this space? Like, what are you doing? And then I had someone who just didn't do anything. Just didn't do anything for, I don't know, about 9 months.
Oh no.
But I was okay with it because I was like, I feel better about investing in an opportunity for us all to learn together as Black trans women, as opposed to there would be no other space that would allow this type of inactivity without it being penalized or reflective of our penal system. So for me, it was an experiment that I had to take in order to get clear about how I could be a better manager, how I could be a better founder, how I could be a better executive director. So I was really grateful for that. Fast forward, one of the things that I learned around marginalized communities, as was already stated, it's very hard to support people who have to find multiple means of income to support themselves. So back to fundraising. One of my strategies has been, I'm actually not hiring anyone if I can't hire them beyond a contract. So if I hire you for 90 days and I don't have the funding to keep you on past that 90 days, then we can't actually pursue that work. And that is one of the things that I will say is infrastructure building for a new company or a new organization is really unheard of. Well, unless you're rich and you got a lot of money, you can do whatever you want, because it's just different when you have $50 million and you only have $5,000. It's very, very different. So that is like the low tier of, I think, most startup Black organizations. But one of the things that I think is just really important is you're not going to be able to do all of your work. Like you were saying, like, oh, we don't need a PR person or we don't need a comms person. Maybe not now, but in your 5 to 10 year strategy, you should probably have that built in, because your work is going to grow and you're going to need more legs, more strength to support the work and being able to articulate about the work. Right now, I'm kind of doing everything. So I'm doing PR, I'm doing comms, I'm doing, you know, leadership development, I'm doing fundraising. But one of the things that I think was important when I created it was the Marsha P. Johnson Institute really came from like probably maybe 3 years of notes, just me taking notes about different things that I would see, like, well, this person didn't, well, this group didn't. And so I turned those notes, typically you all know concept notes are very important. I had a 20-page concept note by the time that I compiled all of my notes. And I had submitted it for our first fundraiser, like our first funding application. And the funder sent it back and said, this is very expansive. You know, this is a 10 to 15 year plan. We just want it like for this year. So one thing that I will always say is always never feel like you're putting too much thought into what you're creating. But definitely think about staffing your org or your new business as a part of that, because a 10 to 15 year plan meant that there were 10 to 15 year employment opportunities that needed to be considered. So yeah, it's always going to be a shit show, though. I will say that. And maybe that's not the thing to say, so I'll be quiet.
No, I will correct for all of your comments after Ross, you've made your comment.
I have one thing, which is fire fast.
Yes.
Firing people's a kindness. We don't talk about it enough.
I know.
It feels so shitty to fire people. Like, it's the worst. It is the worst part. It is worse than fundraising. And fundraising is a really terrible part of the job.
Hierarchy is terrible.
I was like, I don't know if I thought of, I don't know.
Firing people is just terrible. It doesn't feel good. Like, there's nothing good about it. But it's necessary. Sometimes people just aren't a good fit for their role. Or sometimes people outgrow the role they're in and the organization has nowhere else for them to go. Or like sometimes the role that they were filling at the very beginning isn't the right role, isn't the right fit for them 3 or 4 years into the organization's development. Like what you need when you're a startup is like at the very beginning is different than what you need 5 years in.
I'll talk about it.
It sucks. I think, and before, Russ knows he's been very helpful.
He's a receiver of all of our texts, right? All of our
Yeah.
tears and texts. Russ catches them all.
Notice
he's
that I'm
been-
correct after all
Russ
of
knows
those
too
statements.
much. Russ probably knows too much. But I think it's not just firing, it's also like catching conversations early with people as you begin to see like, okay, this person doesn't seem happy anymore. And like, is there actually something I can do to make them happy? And if the answer is no, then like starting to have those conversations early so that you don't end up in a place where like they just like up and like peace out, like, at like literally the least opportune time, which is like if you let that happen, they will just up and peace out at the least opportune time. And there's nothing wrong with, like it's a rational decision from their perspective. And they don't probably mean you any harm, and like it can be really challenging. So I think like having more conversations about coaching people out, firing, things like that, I think, I don't have enough people to talk to about it, so like Russ just like hears about it all the time. We haven't had to fire that many people, but like when you do, it just sucks. Anyway, so that's a thing that's like I think the hardest part of the hiring process is the end.
But this is not an inconsistent perspective from founders, unfortunately. And part of it is just they're very short-staffed, and they want to focus on mission, and they want to have someone who's just going to come in, learn quickly, do a great job, and let them do more. And a bad hire is an emotional, it sucks time, your emotional capacity, you're disappointed. So and oftentimes the hiring process that they have early stage, or that you may have early stage, is not particularly well thought out. So folks can get in who, if you had been more deliberate, might not have made it through a process like that. Okay, well let's go to a different kind of bad thing in the life of being a founder.
What have we not hit yet?
This is being a public person. So for many people, actually one of the sort of interesting things is for many people, there is a desire in some part because I want to be on front of the stage, having people listen to me talk about a thing. And I want to talk a little bit more about what it means. You're not supposed to be shaking your head to no yet. Conversation. But talk a little bit more about like what it means to be representing an organization, to be a founder in public, and what it means to to have to carry that with you in the day-to-day professionally. In any order. If someone is feeling more hopeful or positive, they could start. But I'm not going to expect that. So just go ahead.
I'll start. I'm hopeful.
Okay.
This is the positive.
Okay.
There we go.
I think I didn't get into this to be on stage and to be on green couches and like have a platform at all. But what I will say is I have a few like just guiding principles in being this public piece or public person. One is like I have to speak authentically. For a long time, in my real life, I've had to code switch so I can straighten my hair, show up, at the office and enunciate all my words and be very polite. And then I'm like on the block with my cousins and my friends, and it's a very different. I mean, it's very, very different still. And for me, it was like, how can I be authentic and honestly show who I am at all times, and make sure that I'm actually being representation for folks. I never had a role model that looked like me, that talked like me, that showed up, like this, to places. And so being this public persona, it is my duty and my responsibility to show that you can be this and you can be your full self. I also have a commitment to speaking truth to power. So if you look at me and speaking online, I'm constantly calling out racism and structural bias and racism. I mean, I'm just going for it and centering the experience of folks who have been marginalized. So Black, Brown, Indigenous, LGBTQ+. And so in that, though, there is a weight that comes with it. I'm fearful, and this is worst case scenario, but I have a young child at home, so I'm always mindful of not putting him on social media and making sure that I create a private space for myself and to exist. But at the core of it all, it is just I lead with truth, authenticity, and I will constantly come up against power and speak truth to that, and also just honor the folks that have come before me that have allowed me to do that, and kind of set the model too, especially today where you can be vocal, I can speak my truth, but also know that in that speaking of truth and that in this role there's a bit of protection and power that comes from it. So that's the positive.
Okay, now let's go to Hannah.
I think I am going to say something positive about it. I obviously didn't do this to be on stage, but I think the cool part about it is that a lot of the time, at least when I first started, you don't see founders that look like you a lot of the time, and what you see when you go into a room, you're expected to sort of act a certain way and speak a certain way and sound like you know exactly what you're talking about. And the majority of founders that I have mingled with because we're in the tech space, have been white guys. And so I think I like it because it kind of shows people that you don't have to talk. I have a stutter, so I'll get on stage and start stuttering a lot of the time, and I'm you know what, it's just part of my speech, and I've never seen another founder who gets up on stage and stutters, and so I'm I'm gonna get up there and I'm gonna stutter. And so just things where I don't like networking or being on the floor, and if you put me in a room full of people, I'm probably not gonna be meekly. I'm probably gonna be in the bathroom or the coat room or somewhere else where it's I think having a platform it allows you to tell other people that it's okay to be that kind of a founder as well. You don't have to be the person in the suit with the business card who knows exactly what to say and how to get the money, because as I said, I don't know how to get the fundraising money still, and I've been doing this for 5 years. And so I think what the platform has given me is just access to letting other people know, and it kind of bolsters your own self-confidence that I still did this, everything that this organization is, I did that, and I don't have to get up on stage and pretend to give one of those keynotes that are really boring and no one listens to. I can give my own kind of a keynote where you kind of make jokes and forget things and and that's also a founder. It's a person who's successful, who's achieved something, who's raised not even raised a lot of money, who's earned a lot of money from something that they've created and looks a way that you wouldn't expect them to, and I kind of like the shock value of that.
This is such a hard question for me. I emerged into the spotlight when something that was so important and so large and so monumental was also emerging. And so I tried to hide in it as long as I could, but I think who I was stood out, and I tried to protect myself as much as I could, and still do. So I often shy away from just talking about certain things. But as it relates to the organization, I think one thing that sticks out to me is just the constant concern around making one mistake. And I think you know, we see people make mistakes, and sometimes they're held accountable and sometimes they're not. But what I have noticed is that there's just a deep level of anti-blackness that is associated not just with Black people, but specifically with Black trans women. And so the mistakes that society is able to make, we're not able to necessarily make those mistakes or have opinions that are outside of popular ones. And so because I am associated with something so large, I do constantly feel like there are always eyes on me. And that's a challenge. That is a challenge because it definitely makes you feel unsafe. You know, having a visit from the FBI because of my work makes me feel unsafe. And so, of course, there's the part of it that makes me feel inspired and empowered that people would listen to anything that I have to say. But then there's also this piece of safety that I think is a constant concern for people who look like me and come from the hoods and ghettos that I come from in this country. But I think one of the other things that happens is because you are representing a community, or there's a community that aspires to do what you're doing. Now, this is Russ hears about this a lot. There's a lot of flattening of your expertise. There's a lot of flattening of your knowledge, and there's a lot of flattening of your achievements. And so I find myself being challenged and having competitors that I don't consider that way. And so there's this unspoken competitiveness that shows up oftentimes in my community because of the platform that I have. And I think the desire that people who really don't have what I have now want to get themselves out of. And so they see this as being a vehicle for maybe how they can have more. And so, you know, for me, that has been a challenge in my organization and outside of it, because I just come to this work as literally a girl who was homeless and from jail. So I didn't come into this, you know, wanting to be known or to have a random Wikipedia page with really untrue facts about me. That wasn't why I did it. So yeah, I struggle a lot. I think, you know, one thing that I think is important is just to accept the assignment. And sometimes we have no idea what our assignment is until we're like, bitch, I'm gonna get an F on this test. And so, you know, you start to reorganize your answers, you start to reorganize the information that you store so that you don't fail. But, you know, one of the ways that you'll never fail, I think, is to just accept your assignment. And so that's what I constantly am trying to do, despite the difficult challenges, despite the competitive forces that exist that I don't even consider to be my peers or my equals. But yeah, just accept the assignment. I think there's so much more that I could say, but I won't.
I don't think I have anything else unique to add here.
Okay. Great. So that aside, I know I'm always curious about how, given the kind of pressure you have as a founder, how you attempt to ensure balance in terms of your relationships, friendships, romantic, familial, those kinds of things. How do you attempt to manage those kinds of things? And just overall, like, what do you do as self-care?
I have stuff to say on this.
Sure, say it.
So my partner also works in this space, and she's also very busy. As a matter of fact, she's like gone for like the next 2 weeks. I think we've both sort of like chosen like this like life. I think the thing that is the hardest is the intentionality piece. Like, we're both always tired. we're both like mostly angry all the time. And we both work in the same space, which I think is like maybe like is a little bit unique. So like a lot of our conversation is actually about, a lot of our personal conversations also about work. We also both work from home when she's home. So we also hear each other talking about work all day on the phone. And I think the piece that we found that works is that like we need to have extraordinarily clear ways of communicating with each other, which means that like we need to actually create process in our relationship around how we communicate, because we if we don't, then it's really easy to fall out of balance. And it's really easy to like get angry with each other or mad because like someone like didn't walk the dog for 3 weeks, but then they come back from like a grueling trip and they don't want to walk the dog. And the person who is home is like, well, I've been walking the dog like 4 times a day for 3 weeks. It's your turn. So, you know, and those are really small things, but I think like it spans everything, because like when you do this work, I think the thing that I sort of find as like an overriding feeling is like I feel exhausted all the time, like emotionally, physically, like every way that is possible to be exhausted. And I think if we're not being intentional about the way we're talking to each other, about how we're spending our time, then like we let life happen. And when life happens is like when you fall out of relationship and communication. So I think that's been, I think the thing that we've learned, I think it's different. I think that is different for everyone, what communication looks like. I think the one thing we are lucky about is that we both understand the demands of each other's job. And so we do give one another sort of like the grace like associated with it. It's like, yes, I know you're really tired, and that's like why you didn't do that thing, or like why we didn't get each other gifts like for, you know, like a birthday or something like that, you know, like and I think everything about it is about communication. And then last year we said that we were going to say yes to friends, which meant that when we were really exhausted and really tired and did not want to talk to anyone, and people invited us out, we were like, fuck it, we're going out. And we're going to go see our friends, and we're going to invest in our friendships again. And that's actually been one of the most rewarding things that I think that, and we both agree with this, so like, that either one of us have done in the last year, which includes our work, is just like reinvesting in friends. So like, I would just say, even when you don't want to do it and it feels so hard, I would say like, just say yes, because like those relationships will give you like more value than like you can imagine.
Although when we were out at dinner, you brought up names, and the two of you were discussing, is that someone who we are going to put the time aside for to see? Right? Do you remember that? I remember that. So you were just like, well, did they make the cut of like...
I think what's
You're
important,
very mindful of that.
I think what's important to us is that you made the cut.
I always make the cut. So,
I always.
There is something going on.
It is something
Yeah.
I think that the power of saying no has actually been so good for me. I spent a lot of time saying yes all the time to my family, to my friends, to romantic partners. And one thing that I was noticing, I was like, I'm getting a lot of yeses back. What is going on? And I think there was just this instinct to like give everything, because I was giving so much to my work. So it was carrying over into my personal life. So saying no has been such a gift to me. But one thing I am learning to do is to say yes to myself. So that means I might be late for a meeting if I'm going to go get my nails done because that's necessary. Or I might be late to a speaking engagement because I needed to get an extra hour of sleep. You know, so I think it's really just finding the balance within yourself, and also just creating some very clear boundaries, and I struggle. I'm a Gemini, so I struggle very greatly with boundaries. I like to try to do everything, and then I get bored easily, so then people get mad at me. But then I think there's also this thing where I think I just don't want to have any relationship with anyone who is associated with my work. So I'm like, I want you to be completely so far removed from nonprofits, organizing, politics. I actually don't even want you to have an opinion on that. I want you to not care. It's like I spend 60 hours a week, you know, like doing this work. And so it's like I need to have a space that is just, for me, that is just completely disconnected. So I find myself actually wanting to reinvest in friendships, but not actually in any of the friends that I have. Like, I'm like, give me new people who are completely different than I am, but also completely different than what my day-to-day consists of.
They just gotta make the cut.
Honey, no, we're doing tryouts.
New friends, all right.
Tryouts, yes.
Well, I'm a Pisces, so I don't know what that means.
I'll tell you.
I'm very serious about work-life balance. I don't, like, when I work from home now, which we used to have a workspace, but now I work from home, so I'm double as serious about it, where I do not want to talk about work after 7 p.m. Like, I will not discuss it at all, regardless of who it's with, my fiance, my parents. We will not talk about work, and they know that. We're like, don't, like, if something happens, I'll tell you. Otherwise, just think that we're still trucking along, we're just doing the thing. And I think it's really helpful, because otherwise, when do you stop thinking about it? Like, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, like, it has been, since I moved to New York, it has been the thing that I've been doing. And I don't want to wake up and go to sleep thinking about food waste or garbage or like what it is that we're doing. Like, and I think another thing that like a lot of people have stopped doing that I recently discovered again is hobbies and having things to do outside of your job. Because I don't know, for some reason I seem to think that if it's not contributing to my career or I can't monetize it, then it's not worth doing, which is a really bad way to think, but a lot of people think that way, and we've stopped doing things just because like it's what you want to do. And so I started doing a ton of stuff after work, like taking improv classes and like doing stand up secretly and like things like that just really I tell everyone, just not where it is, but just and I've noticed that like no one gives a shit what my job is here. Like, they don't care if I'm successful at it, if I'm bad at it. All they care is if I'm funny or not, or if I'm a good improviser, which is so refreshing because it has nothing to do with anything that I spend the first 16 hours of my day doing. And I think it's important to have those things that have nothing to do with your job, or like you don't have to talk to people if you don't want to, but just having things to do that are stuff that like you like to do, because I doubt that any of us like every single aspect of our job. It mostly just makes us angry, and I don't think that we should continue discussing that after we get home. And so I think like having just like a strict, like, this is my cutoff, I'm not going to talk about it after this, I'm not going to touch my laptop. If I have to do anything, I'm going to write it down on a notepad and do it tomorrow. Like, I'm not even going to open my phone to do it. But yeah, I think having those boundaries has really, really helped, because otherwise it has like an effect on your health, and like your like stress can really just do a number on you. And so having those boundaries is super important, I think.
Love it. So Hannah, you inspired me to have hobbies. So when we talked last year, I was like, this is my year of hobbies. I haven't committed to anything yet, but check on me in March, and I have a list of things that I'm gonna start doing.
Oh, I'll do it with you.
Okay, good. But I think for me, I mean, I'm a founder, I'm a partner, and I'm a mom, so I have a 5-year-old. And the good thing about a 5-year-old is that it's like a built-in structure. Like, the other day I was heading to an event. It was a very fancy event. Like, it was actually a Jeffersonian dinner, by candlelight, the whole thing. And so I was like ready, and before I'm heading out, my kid is like, well, I need you to read me a book. And I'm like, well, I'm late, gotta call the Uber. He was like, no, I need a story. And so I had to like stop and read the book, and it's like just built in pauses. A lot more work to do, but that helps. And in the area of balance, what I'm finding is there's a lot of, self-care, like, manicure, massage. But for me, really, I've been doing like discipline has been the best thing. So whether it's like time blocking my calendar, so that, you know, I'm like blocking out my drop off when I have to take my kids to school, and like nothing will get scheduled in that time. And blocking out time for lunch. Every day on my calendar, I have an hour blocked out for lunch, and really being disciplined, which doesn't come natural. I'm a Scorpio, so I don't know. But yeah.
Same.
You're a Scorpio too! Oh, yay!
What do these things mean?
We'll find out later. They mean something.
Sitting in between
Yeah.
two Scorpios.
You're sitting with two Scorpios. Instead of two ferns, you have two Scorpios. But I think that, just really being disciplined and caring for myself with some structure, whereas everywhere else, like I can give structure to everyone else, but like doing that for myself is one of the ways I try to keep balance.
So it may not.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Therapy.
Oh yeah.
I go to therapy once a week, and my insurance pays. I found someone who had my insurance. I'm lucky to have insurance. Mental health is really important. Like, I struggle with depression. I have like struggled with an eating disorder, like all sorts of shit. If you like, I find this with my staff. Like, my staff will come to me with stuff, and they're like, I'm like, yo, that is for your therapist. Like, I don't say that out loud, but like, I'm like I can't help you. I can't help you with. I'm not qualified to help you with that. But like, it's really, I would just say prioritizing mental health is extremely important. That's.
So it probably won't surprise you to know this, but we've gone very long.
Longish.
I'm okay with asking questions, but actually following time instructions.
We built in a break, and then we took up the break.
Oh.
So they, Russ's mentorship
No break, yeah.
workshop is supposed to be beginning in just a
But it
couple
can
moments here.
start whenever.
We could, and just keep in mind that Russ is going to run a mentorship workshop in just a couple minutes. So I think we can take a question.
Awesome.
Don't ask a question about mentorship. Russ is going to run a mentorship workshop in just a couple minutes. So if you have, I think we could take one.
You cover any other category but that, because that's. Yeah, does anyone have?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, first of all, I really like the diversity that I'm seeing right now. It's really inspiring, and I feel like empowered by behind the scenes stories that you're telling us, and I feel like it's relatable and real and honest, and thank you so much. And my question is, you're talking about failures, right? What if, when do you know you have to stop? Or when do you know you have to get back up again?
You know, I think for me at the beginning, it was hard to know when I was failing because it was so new. So I didn't know I was failing. Now, I know I know very quickly. I know and I'd say less than a week. You know, if we try a campaign or if we, and as it relates to the work, I don't think there's any failing. Like, if you do a campaign and you only get 2 likes on digital or whatever, you know, you make 5 impressions. I don't think there's failure in the work. I think you have to constantly try. Failing in terms of relationships is very different. I think, you know, that's a hard one. I think it really just depends. It's kind of circumstantial, but I also think it's just like if you've had a history with someone, and luckily I've had a lot of history with a lot of people, which is probably part of the problem. The failing is something you notice. It's just a matter of how soon are you going to address that it feels like it's failing. And sometimes, you know, we'll stay sinking. And so, yeah, I think I knew very quickly. And I think I've held on to some relationships that I needed to let go of because I was afraid that if I let go of those relationships, then that means I had failed, as opposed to like, this has been failing and now this is seeping into the work, which is, you know.
And I want to just add, I think there's a difference between like failing and pivoting, right? And so for me, I mean, in terms of the work, if you have an idea, I'd say you keep going, right? Like whatever that is, I mean, until your soul knows, like, it's enough. But then there's something about pivoting. So if you're trying something, right? I started Radical Health. When we started, we were going to be a tech company. I didn't get funding, so I had to switch to like hosting these conversations. Then we're doing the conversations, and then we got enough money that I could then do the tech again. And in the tech, right, we were switching. We were going to go sell to somebody, but there was a senator who had a DUI, and the funding didn't get passed. And so now we're like, all right, crap, we're going to go straight to consumer, and we're going to go straight to the market. And so there's a big difference between, like, I mean, to the extent, like, in the work, like, you can pivot. And so don't be afraid if you have an idea that you're going to, you know, do one thing and it grows and changes over time. That's just pivoting, and that's allowed, and I welcome that to everyone. Like, pivot fast, like, find traction, look where the fruit is, look where the funding is, look where people are saying yes. Like, when you talk and you say, people are like, oh yeah, even if it's $3 that they give you, like, follow that and let that kind of be your guide. And also, like, always trust your gut, always.
Yeah. And what, really quickly, shift. Like, pivot, but shift. I was working at an organization, it was here in DC, we won't name who those people were, but I told them, hey, you might want to make me the executive director of this organization. They refused to actually make that transition within the organization. So now my organization exists and theirs doesn't. So when people are offering you opportunities to shift based on what they know about funding, what they know about where the areas of opportunity are, never be afraid to not only pivot, but completely shift the entire structure of something that you're thinking about doing.
Yeah, and just to add like one last thing. I think you, in this space, you just keep getting up until you decide that you're done.
Yeah.
Like, because there may be a time where you, like for me, I know that there's a limit to how far that we can take this. Like you said as well, there's a limit to the number of years that you're gonna spend. And it's okay to have that. So like, don't, if it's like you not getting funding or things like that, then you keep getting up if you still want to do it. But if you decide that, like, you know what, I want to hand it off, or my talents would be better used somewhere else, but don't do it because of a failure, but because like you feel like, you know what, this is my time.
Yeah.
And you'll know when that
I
is.
think very often founders do this thing where they're saying that they're starting up something, but they never actually do anything. So they'll go and they'll continue saying, like,
I know.
Right, I'm doing the thing, but they never actually have goals set up that allow them to create a notion of momentum. And I'd say that if you have a set of things like that that help you to believe, like, build confidence in yourself to do the thing, show that there's momentum, like, I think the more you can have some of those things to start, usually that builds then a sense of confidence in yourself and allows you to say, well, I had some goals, I'm not doing any of these things in support of that, why is that? And kind of take a step back and try to answer that question. Oh.
Let's do, we'll do two more questions.
Yes, you do
those are the hands I
question,
saw.
you do question and answer.
There's a workshop right after this. Hopefully some of the folks are sticking around, we'll still get a chance to talk, but
Okay.
So my
there and then
question
there.
relates to how do you manage gatekeepers, both gatekeepers outside our communities and gatekeepers inside our communities that sort of risen to a certain level of status, they now consider themselves gatekeepers, whether they're in community of color or not.
I feel like I keep giving very long answers, so I'm like, I don't want to respond, but I feel like I have to. That is something that is inevitable in the work, especially, it's just depending on how big your work gets. That's just something, you know, and maybe Russ can maybe talk about what it's like to found something with other people, because sometimes the people you found something with become gatekeepers. And that in itself is a huge struggle, because you're not only fighting about resources, but you're also fighting around like the fundamental vision and the principles and the goals. So, you know, for me, it was just to create something on my own where I didn't have to have those kind of fights with anyone, that we could stay completely clear. So I would just say, never be afraid to create something on your own. If it's something that you believe in, it will surpass any of the gatekeeping that people think they're doing against you.
Yeah. So gates have many holes in them and many other entrances. So go under, around. I mean, I see this all the time in community and outside. So someone who thinks they're in power, but they forget the admins and the people on the ground and people who hold space in community, and forget that, like, I really believe in community organizing as a power and people power. So pull whoever you can. Whoever says no, that's fine. Let them keep saying no. They'll be so busy doing that, they won't see you come around the back.
Gatekeepers are always accountable, to a set of individuals, whether it's a set of community members or it's a donor or a set of donors. If a gatekeeper is a problem, I've always found, and this is something I even tell our candidates when we're working with them around endorsements and things like that, go to the people that they're accountable to and organize those people.
And if you don't know who they're accountable to, which is often the case once you get into the nitty gritty of community organizing, everybody has a boss. Sometimes people's bosses are silent and you have no idea they're working together. You stay focused on your plow. Just stay on your plow so that you don't have no squigglies, because sometimes you won't even know who people are accountable to, and that's just the nature of the game.
My question had to do with more of sustainability in regards to starting off your organizations. A lot of the time we're always in the mindset of giving, and so we kind of forget about ourselves in that. And so my question to you guys is, how are you, especially if you're doing this full time, then factoring in how you take care of yourselves, like in regards to like finances and you know, having a family or having loans or whatever responsibilities you guys may have. How are you factoring, whether it's through fundraising or through grants, like how to then take care of yourself?
Well, I guess when you're first starting, definitely date before you marry whatever it is that you're starting. Like, it's just, I don't know, I think you never want to jump, like, always, like, take the risk, but don't jump headfirst into anything without thinking about finances, because you're not going to go very far. And, like, it's good to, I think it's, so what I did, so this started in college, and then when I graduated, it was either, like, work on this or like take the consulting job. And so what I ended up doing was working part-time at like a vintage store, so I could like pay for my apartment while this was still sort of starting up. Because
those boots there?
Oh no.
When you see us next time, we're gonna have the same boots.
We've
by
been
the way.
operating for 5 years now. I can get the boots. But yeah, but just definitely think about, like, because if you're stressed about like making money for yourself when you're first starting, it's going to be really difficult for you to focus on what it is that you're trying to build. And so I think I would definitely recommend, like, try and monetize off of any sort of skills that you have. Like, if you can do graphic design, then do it on the side. If you, like, I didn't really have any of those types of skills. That's why I ended up working at the store opposite my apartment, because it was like close and I could be on my laptop there. But just anywhere where you can get a job that like pays an amount that you can subsist off of while it's still growing is super helpful in terms of the very beginning of anything.
And now, like, now that you do have the money, how do you, because I'm assuming you don't work at the vintage.
No.
So how do you calculate?
They fired me.
Oh, they do. Well,
It's not a good employee. I think the laptop on the table was too much.
oh. So now that they do, how do you then factor in, like, okay, this is how much you're gonna take out of this or make out of it?
So it was gradual. I started with the amount that I needed to live. So it was like a very, very little bit. And then as we started making more, covering all of our bases, I was like, okay, like how much of, like, what percentage of the work am I doing? And so you give yourself like a fair wage. Like, if you're doing everything, then you should pay yourself for everything that you're doing. Like everything that someone else, like you would hire like another person to do. So if I'm doing comms, I'm gonna give myself a cut of whatever I would give the comms person because I'm doing it. And so it's like, definitely, like, if you're doing the work, then pay yourself for the work. And I think that's really important, where you don't have to keep yourself at a minimum wage if you can afford to pay yourself higher. Like, like keeping that money in the bank is not going to make you scale faster. Like, if you just put the money into things that are like propelling you forward, then you're gonna end up like it's gonna end up coming back and you're gonna end up making more.
I think something you have to factor into that is, if you are a 501c3,
Yes.
there is a certain ceiling for the amount that you can spend on admin.
You definitely don't hit that in the first 3 years.
No, but you've got to be very careful
Oh,
with
of
it,
course.
because you don't want to lose. So in
Yeah.
taking a salary for yourself, that's something to be considered.
Yeah.
So
There are
what,
like guidelines.
well, I was just gonna
Usually,
offer,
I know, like,
if you don't always have to go the C3 route. So with that, fiscally sponsored projects, my organization is a fiscally sponsored organization. And so one of the things that we try to, how I think about even my own pay, I've probably had 3 raises in our 2 years just because I started out at the very bottom. And then I was like, actually, what is the industry standard for executive directors? I would like to be as close to what my peers are as possible. And I'm still probably way off from where most white cisgender people are in the nonprofit industry, but that was how I based like my ceiling. So I said, okay, funders, this is where you actually have to fund me at, because not only do I need to live, but this needs to be somewhat equitable. And so as an organization that's constantly thinking about that, I'm constantly basing each of our positions off of what is the standard average for this position within the industry, and how close can we get to it, even if we're not going to have all of the funding. Another piece that I just wanted to add in that's really important, with your backers, whether it's investors or funders or whatever the case may be, you want to make sure, again, in that general operating support, that things that you need in terms of like childcare or mental health care, that those are things that your funders are actually providing additional resources or creating a very specific plan around those resources so that you can meet those type of needs.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
So
you
we
all.
have, we built in a lot of breaks today, so and it's a panel that deserved to go longer with this one. A little round of that was terrific. No, really, that was awesome. I expected it to be awesome.